Welcome to the Wisconsin Podcast. I'm Craig Sauer. On this podcast, we talk Wisconsin things, everything from media, sports, culture, nature, politics, and more. I launched this podcast in late September and have enjoyed the ride so far. Although I'm looking forward to many new episodes in 2018, including interviews about snowy owls and Apostle Island's National Lakeshore, on this episode, I take a look back at some of the best moments from the Wisconsin Podcast in 2017. That includes my conversations with Conor Moran, the director of the Wisconsin Book Festival, Jen McCoy, a former newspaper reporter that specialized in profiling veterans, Melanie Radzicki McManus, who wrote a book about hiking the entire Ice Age Trail, and Adam Mertz, a former sports editor who had to leave his chosen profession behind. But first, Conor Moran from episode 4. I asked him what it's like to facilitate a place where civil dialogue and conversation actually take place with the Wisconsin Book Festival. You know, you are the place where people are having that conversation that everybody keeps saying that we need to have. Is that pretty awesome? It is pretty awesome. I mean, I came into this in 2013 when the library took over the festival. It had been run by the Wisconsin Humanities Council. Conversation is really important to them. And so between that and my background at Politics and Prose Bookstore in DC, which did an author event every night in much the format that we do here, those were essential qualities. Giving the audience the opportunity to ask the question always leads to something interesting. And that has come to kind of mark Wisconsin. I can go back and talk about 3 or 4 or 5 different things that you can't find at a different book festival. Book festivals do it. I'm sure the Miami Book Festival has great Florida questions and the LA Times Book Festival has great California questions. But that does really excite me. I think you see it after an event. People are buzzing about something. They're talking about whether they're going to buy the book, who they're going to buy the book for. They stand in the signing line even though they don't have a book to ask an additional question. And that's really what Festival Weekend is about for me, is that community, whether that's, regardless of what kind of books you read, you're all here to see these authors. You're all here to kind of experience this with other readers. I know multiple people who have become friends because they just see each other at these readings. And then they start sitting next to each other and then they start having conversation. Next thing you know, they're making plans together. So, it's a really special thing. And it's not the experience you get from other types of cultural events. You were mentioning before that you have kind of some previous experience working in DC with authors, booking shows and events. Yep. Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of how you kind of got into this kind of whole world? Yeah, I went to law school, which is a weird answer. I went to law school here from 04 to 07, and I moved to DC to be a lawyer. And while I was there, it was the end of the second Bush administration, and they were just not filling the jobs, right? Like the last year of an administration, they're like, wow, leave it for the next guy. So there weren't a lot of openings. And it was one of those situations where I was out buying a birthday present for my wife, and I was in this bookstore, Politics and Prose, and I thought to myself, if I don't do it now, I'll never do it. I've always wanted to work in a bookstore. I have an English degree. I care about this, but if I go be a lawyer for 50 years, I'm not going to retire and open a bookstore, or I am, and I'm not going to know what I'm doing. Right. So I got a job there, and that's a miraculous tale in and of itself, but I got a job there and was there about maybe 6 weeks, maybe just a month. And I came home and I said to my wife, like, I know that I just racked up all this debt. I know that I went to law school and that was hard on everybody, but like, this is my job and like, this is what I want to do. And my wife, to her eternal credit, was like, oh, absolutely. I've known since the first day. And so I just kind of stopped being a lawyer. I stopped looking for law jobs. I started working full time at the bookstore and, rose pretty quickly, up to the level where I was managing the sales floor, and then I was the event department assistant. So a good friend of mine really taught me how to kind of do the whole thing, from pitching publicists to advertising, scheduling, and then the part about the sales floor was like, I'll set up the chair. I mean, I'll set up the chairs in 2 weeks at the Wisconsin Book Festival. everything, host the author, get the water, how to do the intro, how to do the signing line. And so over 3 years, I probably did something like 1,000 events, real crash course. And to put that in perspective, I've been doing this job for 4.5 years. I haven't done 500 events yet. So really just constant and fun and, great stories and, this skill. And then we moved back here and I didn't get a books job. I was working in nonprofits, and then long story, but I ended up checking the library website one day, which was out of character, let's just say. And this job was there. And I thought, I just saw it and said, that has to be, I have to do that. And luckily they believed me.
What did your parents think when you abandoned the law school idea?
Which parent? Well, I won't throw either one under the bus in case they, want to take issue. But one of them thought it was a really good option while I continued to look to be a lawyer. And that was definitely more out of thinking I would be really good at it, not you have to do this for whatever other reason. And the other one was you cracked the code. You figured it out. You figured out how to kind of live your life with the purpose that, professionally with the purpose that you live it personally. So,
where did that come from? Where did that?
They were both supportive. That I do not mean to say that I took more from one or the other.
No, I gotcha. Where did it come from within you? Did you grow up with books? Why is it something that you felt the need to do?
Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting question. Yes, I grew up with books. Books were, kind of infinitely important. They were important to my dad specifically, but my mom was always a reader too. I have a number of uncles who, a book was a gift that meant more than, a toy or whatever. And I was always a reader. I don't remember a time of my life when I couldn't read. I don't have a memory of learning to read. Neither does my wife, and our daughter taught herself to read at 3.5. So maybe there's something hardwired. But yeah, it's just always been a place to turn for me that, satisfies either the escapist kind of fiction realm. I like to read a lot of contemporary fiction. I love to read debut novels, which is kind of a weird subcategory. They don't group them like that very many places. But, or the way to lay out a really extensive argument. I know a lot of people think the New Yorker articles are too long, but step back for a second and realize that most of those then turn into books that are even longer. I do think that I'm definitely an extroverted person, but I love the fact that way that your brain feels when you spend too long reading and you get kind of loopy about it and you're totally dialed in and you forget to eat and you stay up too late. And, I don't feel that way when I watch too much TV. I feel sluggish and lethargic. And when I read too much, I'm like, oh yeah, I can do anything.
The next segment comes from episode 7 and my conversation with Jen McCoy, a former reporter for the Portage Daily Register. McCoy wrote numerous profiles of local veterans. First, I asked her how she got started writing these profiles.
So the editor at the time assigned it to me, actually. And it was kind of an uncomfortable beat to be put on because I'm, not a veteran. I have veterans in my family, but this was obviously after 9/11, and I wasn't sure how veterans in general would feel opening up. I didn't know really how to start the conversation or what the conversation even was.
What was kind of the reason that they kind of gave you why the editor wanted to kind of take this on as a focus, why they wanted to do that? What was in it for the newspaper to want to profile veterans?
So it started out as just World War II veterans. And the editor had, I think at his previous paper, done the same thing. And so, you know, it was just kind of a race against time for the people who were still living, and still are living, in terms of capturing their stories, you know, and with age, how much you can remember, and also how much you're willing to share, because it's extraordinarily personal and vulnerable. And I think the benefit to the paper was, here are the people that, you know, you see in your community that go to your church, or that are at the community center, or, you know, the greeters at a store, and here's who they really are. Here's their life story. And it's scary and sad and intense and hopeful and loving, and much bigger than I think people had explored, because I think people hadn't asked them before, or they weren't ready to talk about it.
And you were saying earlier that you had some trepidation about taking on the task. You were like 23, 24 when you were doing this at the start. Tell me about like the first one that you go in and do. What were kind of the thoughts going in through your head when you sat down for the first time with a veteran, and how did that go?
I remember the first veteran that I interviewed. He lived on Silver Lake Drive, and I still remember the house. And his son was there, and he had kind of a book or a memoir about the battles that he had been in. I don't think it was specifically about him, but the inference was that I knew my history, which I don't, but I learned over time. And it was intimidating, because the questions I think that are intriguing to people on the outside of it are, you know, what did it look like? What did you do? You know, what did you see? But I always started with, what year were you born? And what was your childhood like? And then moved into, you know, when you're 16 and Pearl Harbor happens, where were you? And then take it from there, because jumping right into, so you were, you know, in the Pacific, it doesn't garner any trust, because I don't have a dialogue with them as a person first. And the interviews would take, I mean, the first one probably took 3 to 4 hours, which, like, you know, the editor wasn't that pleased with. But I didn't know what I needed to write, and I didn't know what was the story, you know? And so eventually, I think he talked about being a paratrooper and jumping out of a plane into a swamp, and kind of getting underneath the water there so that he wasn't found out. I mean, you start the dialogue, and then all of these untold stories start to kind of come to fruition. And I think it helped that I was young, because I, you know, didn't have any personal connection to it. I mean, my grandfather was a Marine in World War II, but I'm not a family member. I'm not a friend, you know, although I would like to consider myself a friend, friendly to people.
Like, how many of these did you do over the years?
Yeah, I want to say maybe 40. Quite a few. I think I did probably every weekend for a couple of years. When I was working weekends, I did them. And they all would take hours and hours, because I'm asking them to ease into this incredible foreign territory of personal trauma that a lot of times they haven't even talked with their spouses about. So I had, you know, it takes a long time to, like I said before, kind of get into the motion and the rhythm of a conversation where somebody will say, and then this is what happened. And surprisingly, you know, a lot of times they would cry. And I 100% would cry with them, because how could you not be moved?
So did you eventually start enjoying it? You said at first that it was tough to do, but did over time you kind of become passionate about telling these stories?
Yeah. It was a slow trickle at the beginning of people wanting to talk. I think then as it kind of moved forward, it gained momentum, and then there were a number of people that I couldn't get to, because I like to think that hopefully people contacted me because they thought that I did it justice to the best of my ability. And, I remember one man that I really am fond of, and his name was Clem Evans. And, I went to his house on a Saturday, and his wife had us sit at their table with their china, and we had tea and cookies, and it was very intimate and very cathartic. And I was very passionate about it because, these were real people looking at you in the eyes and telling you some really scary, intense stuff. And how could I not be passionate for everything that they've been through? I mean, I don't think I enjoyed it, but I know that I enjoyed the connection with the person. It was hard to hear some of the things, but I can't say that that pales in comparison to the person having to do it themselves. Like, I don't want to overshadow that at all.
Did it change the way you think of what war is?
Yeah, it did. Because I was, before the Iraq War started, I went to DC with some of my friends, and I protested the war, and I've always been very engaged in social justice. And I had a preconceived notion of who enlisted, even though my dad was, in the Vietnam era, and my uncle. It changed the way I look at war, because everybody who went through it had a different experience. Like Clem said, I hate war, and it's horrible. And, everybody basically had the same message, but like for some people, they, said it was necessary because they had to take on the Nazis to stop this hate fuel from taking over the world.
Do you have any advice for other people who they have a veteran in their family and they want to hear the story, but they've never done it? They've always wanted to do it. They've always wanted to talk to their grandpa or their husband or their uncle about their experience in the war. Do you have any advice for them and how to approach it, how to get them talking about it, to share their story so that they can document it and just kind of share that with the family?
Yeah, I think the way to start is to start at the beginning the way that I did. A lot of times, I think the fear was, are you going to ask me if I killed somebody? And the answer to that is, they probably did, because they were going to be killed. And you have to assume that that's part of war, and also have no judgment going into it. This person is still your grandfather or your spouse or your uncle. I think bringing out things like, did you have a nickname during your time? Like bringing out little things that might enter into the bigger story, I think are touchstones. Or do you keep in touch with anybody from your platoon? Tell me a little bit about your best friend there. And I can't say that that's a magic pill and that that'll work, but when you make sure to humanize somebody's story and don't just say, something highly offensive like, did you take somebody else's life? Which is really hard for people to talk about. And some people talked about it, and I never asked that question. That's too visceral. You can't start there. You have to start at the beginning, which is, hey, you were young once too, and that was really scary, and you're a human. And I think one of the keys is to just not judge or react when people are going to open their hearts to you. If you don't want it to be unfiltered, then just be open to the fact that this person might tell you things that you never associated with them. And I think that's okay. And I think that releases some of the trauma, I would hope. And maybe has you see them in a different light too. And hopefully in a more whole way. You see the whole person. And everybody deserves that.
Melanie Radzicki McManus, the author of Thousand Miler, spoke with me in September for episode 3 about her thru hike of Wisconsin's Ice Age Trail, an adventure that took more than a month. And for people who don't know, what the trail is, what did you learn about it? And, what's kind of the best description you can give people of what the Ice Age Trail is?
Well, yeah, I really want Wisconsinites to know what this trail is. As I said before, there are 11 national scenic trails. The most well-known and what's considered America's granddaddy of long-distance hiking trails is the Appalachian Trail. And a lot of people now have also heard of the Pacific Crest Trail because of Cheryl Strayed's book and movie Wild. But there are 9 others that are wonderful trails as well, and the Ice Age Trail is one of them. Our trail in particular is unique in that it traces the terminal moraine of the last glacier, so the ending point where the glacier stopped and then started receding. And so it showcases glacial remains. And I did not know that Wisconsin has some of the best glacial remains in the entire world. So people come here to see, who are into geology, come here to study and see our glacial remains. And the Ice Age Trail showcases them. So that's fantastic. It's about 1,100 miles long today. About 650 miles are completed. The Ice Age Trail Alliance has created what they call connecting road routes that connect one trail segment to the next in the areas where they're still trying to find and purchase land to create the entire trail.
And so once obviously you have something in your mind of how this is going to go, and then you're actually on the trail. Did some of the pre-planning kind of just fall out the window and just kind of like, oh, that's not going to work at all?
Yes and no. I mean, for the most part, things like what the clothes I brought along and the foods and people helping me along the way, that all worked pretty well. But I certainly had some issues in the trail. Second day out there, I fell and my knee hit a rock. And then I wasn't able to run, and I was trying to find chiropractors in the bigger places I passed by because I thought it was something that could just be kind of knocked back into place and have some therapy on it, which I did find, and it did help, but not until I got to Antigo. So I had probably a full week or so where I couldn't really run, and so I wasn't covering as many miles as I wanted to. And for those who haven't read the book yet, I don't want to say too much about some other issues, but yes, I did have some issues with, feet, and as might be expected. And so you don't always go the pace you want to go, and sometimes you get lost. Now there's actually an app out which makes the hike almost foolproof because it'll plot you via GPS where you are, so you can see if you get off the trail. You can just turn it on and it'll show you where the trail is. But 5 years ago, they didn't have that. So, sometimes you get turned around and then you are late again. You lose time. You're behind schedule. But overall, it went pretty well.
You brought up feet, and I mean, you're a runner, so obviously you have some kind of idea of like how important your feet are. And, I'm sure you've kind of tweaked your feet, like running and doing various things. What kind of like special considerations do you have to like kind of try to take care of your feet along the hike?
First of all, I started with definitely socks that, wicking socks, so no cotton or anything like that. So I had good socks. I had a lot of pairs of shoes, which I am a strong believer in. Even if you just have 2 different pairs of shoes, if you're going to do any kind of long distance hiking, it's best to rotate. Even if you have the same brand of shoes, same model and everything, but they're just 2 different pairs, they still will fit a little differently on your feet, and that can prevent a lot of, like if you have a hot spot one day, then you put on the other pair the next day. So that was really critical. But you're still, when you're out there 10, 11 hours a day, every day, and when I was hiking in 2013, it was a very hot and humid September, and so you get really sweaty and things like that. You just have to be careful. You take care of your hot spots or blisters as they occur. You don't wait for them to get worse. I did do some elevating of my feet at the end of the day, and while I slept overnight, I don't know for sure if that helped, but they got swollen and kind of stayed puffy throughout the whole hike until I stopped hiking so many miles every day. So yeah, things like that. Ice bath, I don't know if that's valid, but it's something they used to talk about for runners, is after a long endeavor, you soak for 10 minutes in an ice cold bath before you shower. That's supposed to help inflammation. So I did a lot of little things. I don't know for sure what might have, helped or not helped, but I did try.
I'm also kind of curious about like kind of the mental aspect of having to, you're basically hiking for a month, taking several weeks of just doing a singular kind of task. And I know you had support along the way, but was it at all isolating or, a little bit disconnecting to be on the trail so much and be doing one thing, kind of just walking forward? Or was it kind of the opposite of like more being connected to certain things? I mean, what was kind of like the mental aspect of that hike for you?
For me, it was phenomenal. I know a lot of people said to me, "Don't you get bored out there?" Because I only ran into 5 other thru hikers, and it was all toward the beginning. But no, I mean, it was just everything they say about the benefits of being in the outdoors. My stress levels went way down, just not counting my feet being sore. I sit a lot for my job, and I have some lower back issues, some scoliosis, and so it's hard for me to sit a lot. Well, walking all day was the best thing. My back never hurt. I just thoroughly enjoyed it. Like I said, my mind never, I don't know, you're just seeing so many new things. You're always watching for the blazes. It was just a wonderful experience. I will say, though, even though I did see a crew person several times a day, and, I'd go to someone's house or motel or something at night, so I was seeing people. It's not like I was by myself camping, but it was still very disconcerting to come the day I got off the trail, to kind of come back. You do kind of get this feeling like I stopped in at Costco, and it was early October, and it was all the Christmas decorations out already, and Halloween, and throngs of people, and I almost kind of froze. It was almost like sensory overload, all the lights and things moving, and I felt like some of the stories you hear about people who come from maybe a third world country or something, and they come to America and see all the choices, and in a grocery store or something. It was pretty overwhelming.
Because on the trail, you basically you're just picking between directions, right? I mean, it's like go this way or go that way.
Right. All you think about kind of is you wake up, you hike, you eat, you sleep. And, I started seeing things like Halloween decorations after three weeks or so on the trail. And it's like, oh, that's right. Halloween. Yeah. And you just kind of, it's amazing what you kind of forget. It's like, why are people making such a big fuss about this again? And then I started seeing Packer decorations in some of the towns. It's like, oh, that's right. It's football season. It's very interesting how you quickly get into just this, I don't know, meditative, and just think about where I need to go and where I'm going to eat and sleep.
Can you tell me a little bit about the final day for you on the trail and what it was like to accomplish your goal and to do it in the time that you did it?
Yeah, it was very bittersweet. I was so excited, of course, that I knew I was going to make it, that I was going to set a women's record. And I wanted to get back home and be with my husband and all that. But it was also kind of sad in a way because I just had such a good time. Our state, always knew Wisconsin was a beautiful state, but really when you're walking these trails, you go to so many places you'd never ever see, certainly from a car. And it was just so beautiful, and it really connected me with the state on a very intimate level. And so I was a little bit sad to walk up there and know that I wasn't going to be going out there again.
For the last segment, I go back to the pilot episode of this podcast that I recorded with Adam Mertz, the former sports editor for the Capital Times. I talked with Mertz about a lot of things, including Badger football, but I also talked to him about the Capital Times transition from print to digital and why he left the profession he once loved. I remember being at a press conference where it was announced that the Cap Times was no longer going to be the Cap Times as it had been. And, I remember the spin that was kind of put on it. Yeah. Like this is an opportunity, obviously, all kinds of corporate language of pivoting or whatever it is. Right. We're going to be a stronger organization, leaner. Yep. We're going to do all these things. Yep. Did the people in the building believe any of that? Did you believe any of that? That it was like a good thing?
Well, I mean, if you're going to sit back and say, no, a good thing would have been adding 15 more reporters and, going all in and doing something else. So no, I think everyone had reasonable, but this was like, all right, at least we're trying something. And we're trying something proactive instead of like letting the daily newspaper die this slow death. Maybe we'd be able to ride it out longer and, stick to our guns and tell the State Journal, too bad, we're still taking, half of the revenue and this kind of thing. So I think there was a sense of like, all right, at least we're giving this a shot. But there was a lot of concern over really how long are they invested in funding it to this level? What is the actual commitment overall to this whole endeavor? So I think that was a natural. I mean, you're talking to journalists, the biggest skeptics and cynics that there are. Yeah. So all they're doing is, they're peppering management at meetings with questions that management can't or doesn't want to answer. There was a lot of trepidation over what the future was going to be and what the future held and what's the real direction that we're supposed to be going in, because we were there were a lot of days when you kind of just fumble in the dark, and that's uncomfortable for people who have been so used to regularity and consistency. I mean, that's half the reason why you went into newspapers, in my mind, was you're not going to make a ton of money. You're going to have great experiences, great exposure. You're going to feel like you're doing something that's meaningful work. The whole fourth estate thing of really, I mean, sports is stretching it to some level of like protecting, democracy and protecting values and serving as a watchdog over the mighty and, kind of making sure that everyone's playing a fair game. When the reward for that was the security, was something like, this is always going to be there. People are always going to value a free press and quality information and quality reporting and facts, actual facts that you can then debate over and take sides and figure out solutions and work together and figure out solutions. So I think that there was a lot of already sort of disappointment over seeing where the entire industry was going and wondering how on earth that the Cap Times, with this new endeavor where we didn't come in with all the answers, how that was possibly going to succeed. So that was rough.
So eventually you make a decision to leave the newspaper business. Yeah. What were some of the thoughts and calculations that you made? And, you had worked there you'd been in the business for about 20 years, right?
Yeah.
What was the consideration of taking the jump, leaving the business, going to do some other things?
Yeah. So I knew what I wanted to do when I was 10 and a half years old. I loved sports my whole life. I knew then that I wasn't going to be playing professional sports. And I latched on to NC State and Jim Valvano, the magical year when they win the national championship in basketball and upset Phi Slamma Jamma in Houston, the craziest upset to that point that had existed in recent college basketball memory. And I remember sitting in my grandparents' house watching the game. I had an old typewriter and I wrote up my game story for it. And I'm like, yep, this is what I want to do. It's a great adrenaline rush. It had been my whole identity. And so there's a lot of fear about that, about it wasn't just like leaving a job. It was the only thing I ever really wanted to do. And so what do you do after you've done your dream job? And people ask, what's your dream job? I'm like, well, maybe like commissioner of baseball, but like, what's your realistic dream job?
Yeah.
But there isn't one, after you've done what you wanted to do. And there was so much like, I became jaded by the end of being there. And it was sort of a downward spiral. It was like, if you stuck in it, you're going to be hurting mentally. If you left, there was this insecurity about what am I going to be? Who am I? You've based all these relationships. It's all been built on what you do and the circles that you run in. And so there's a lot of fear out of that. And it took probably 2 years of my wife hassling me, she had worked at the Cap Times. We met there. She had made the jump out into kind of a communications role before that. She's like, you gotta make the move. You gotta get out of there and get to something that's gonna give you a chance of working until retirement age. I was in a great spot at the newspaper. I was given a really awesome role, and I still worry to this day that people took it as disrespect, but I saw what was coming. I saw the resources start to dissipate, and my thought was, this is not what I got into it for. As much as fun as I've had doing this, it's not what drives me. It's not what fuels me. And there's little chance that I get through to retirement age. I envision myself being 53, out of work, no other work experience. What then? Kind of thing. So I made the jump, was fortunate enough to land in a publishing job that still existed, in an industry that I've been so pleasantly surprised to find is interesting. I would have never thought that. I would have thought it was something that I would just try to get through in terms of the credit union space. I love the fact that it's a national industry. We're taken care of here. I punch out, at 5 o'clock on a Friday, maybe 5:30 if you're listening, Keenan Management, 6 even sometime. And I have a weekend. It's still fresh to me 4.5 years later that I have a job and I have a life, and that these can be two separate things, and that I can give it my all when I'm on the job. And when I go home, I'm not pulling out a laptop. I'm not worried about what's breaking on Twitter. The quality of life and my stress level are just on a different planet from where I was at the end of my stay at the newspaper.
That's it for this week and 2017 on the Wisconsin Podcast. Make sure to check out the full interviews with Conor Moran, Jen McCoy, Melanie Radzicki McManus, and Adam Mertz at the website wispod.com. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play. And if you have a great idea for somebody I should interview in 2018, I'd love to hear it. You can contact me on Twitter at WisPodcast and on Facebook at the Wisconsin Podcast. Cheers.